in terms of Japan and China, because that was a kind of combined culture. They were borrowing off of each other. There was a huge amount of ancient trade between Japan and China. And the two cultures really amalgamated. They only really became an isolated culture as far as Japan is concerned at the time of the samurai. So that's about 1,100 years ago. They kind of split away from China. But before then, in the ancient times, they were trading with each other.
Wow.
And what we can see is that the whole of Oceania was actually their trading kind of backyard.
Sure.
You can see Oriental influences all around the planet as long as you've got the eyes open to see them when you go into certain museums. If you go to the Ivory Coast in Africa and you go to a place, Gabon, Gabon,
Yeah.
you can see ceremonial voodoo masks which are identical to kabuki masks.
Wow.
And this shows you that there was an Oriental trade route coming from Southeast Asia. It was stretching all the way over into the Middle East and then dipping down into the northern Sahara and going across into the Ivory Coast.
Chris, we need more people like you out there, brother. We need more people like you looking at all of this stuff. It's such a very wide. I mean, but we're in the driving seat. I mean, we have information at our fingertips. All we've got to do is research and put it together. It's all sitting there ready for people. It's just
absolutely,
and there's so much of it. It's not like a competition. There's just so much of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with star gods, when I started writing that book, I was really interested in these Venus figurines. Why did they not have any hands? Why did they not have any feet? And why did some of them not have any heads? What happened is I reread the Epic of Gilgamesh. I reread the Ogdoad creation myths from the Temple of Unas, Saqqara. And I realized that if the legends of the Anunnaki or the star gods was true, and that they'd actually come down from the stars and they'd interacted with monkey men. I don't really like that phrase, but I mean, it sums it up.
Yeah.
And that they actually kick-started Homo sapien and created this spark, this gap, which is in all of the official textbooks of how is it that we've got these broken cul-de-sac branches of human evolution in South Africa with the monkey men who evolved into nothing. And there is no explanation of why they ended that evolutionary branch. Then all of a sudden there's a gap. Then bang, Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal man are everywhere, Homo erectus and an Homo sapien. It's like, it's like jumping from designing an old Citroen 2CV, one of those weird cars that the French farmers drive, to having a Bugatti Veyron.
Wow.
With nothing in between. All right, that is really what the textbooks are telling us. Well, that gap is filled by the Anunnaki, by the Nomos, by the interaction of, the world teachers. Most of the legends say they came from the stars. In Mali and in the Congo, in Africa, they say they came from the sea. Okay, well, that is very, very similar to the amphibian aspect of the Ogdoad.
Sure.
Now, if you really think about the nuts and bolts process, how would you take those monkey men that were spread all over sub-Saharan Africa? We know that because we've got their skull fragments in the museums. How would you physically manage that if you were a star god coming from the Pleiades or somewhere else? You would have to have an intermediary genetic sausage factory where you would have a process of trial and error. You would genetically modify the human egg. you would genetically splice the sperm, and you would actually have, like I say, a genetic sausage factory situation. That is what these Venus figurines are. They are showing that there were humanoid sausage factory brood mares. Many of these figurines have vertical lines down their stomachs because they weren't giving birth normally. There was a cesarean intersection done to extract the fetus by these star gods, and it all fits together. If you want to look at it carefully, it's the most logical solution. And these legends, we find them in Mali, the legends are in the Congo, the legends are in Japan, the legends are in Iraq, the legends are in Egypt. And the missing part of the jigsaw puzzle, which I had missing up until a few days ago, was where was the this idea of the great world teachers coming from nowhere, maybe coming from the stars, and genetically engineering and kickstarting modern mankind in Mexico? Where was that in terms of the American cultures? And I found it. And I found it in a little village museum in a place called Tlatelolco in Mexico.
Wow.
And there they have the figurines. Dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens of figurines. And as you probably know, James, not very well labeled. These figurines, some of them are identical to the Dogu figurines that you get from the Jomon people in Japan.
Wow.
Some of them look like the figurines that you get from Iraq. And you see elongated headed men who are alien looking with erect penises inserted into another figurine, which is your typical Venus goddess figurine with no head, stubby arms, no feet.
Wow.
And that is what you're seeing. Now, if you don't go along this route, and normal academia is ignoring this, how do you explain the vast quantity of these figurines, and why were these figurines buried in sacred mounds of earth? It doesn't add up. The only thing that adds up is when you take into account Gilgamesh, the pyramid texts, the creation myths of the Ogdode, and the myths of the Nomos with the Dogon people in Mali. When you take that into account, everything falls into place. These figurines are telling us what happened. It's not a nice thing that happened, but basically these beings interacted with monkey men. They had a whole process of trial and error that resulted in various versions, version 1, version 2, version 3 of modern man, which was Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Homo erectus, Homo sapien, and Homo sapiens sapiens. And so that's really what my film partly is about, that I'm doing right now, but it's also about the communication systems that were used in the ancient world using these psychoactive herbs. I know this sounds crazy, but shamanism and voodoo is the baseline from which all the great religions came from. And these teachings, or the base teachings of shamanism, were what those world teachers, or those star gods, whatever you want to call them, gave mankind. And it was all based on genetics. It was all based on blood sacrifice and teaching that the life force is contained in the blood. And that was the teaching that is the common thread from the Mayans to the Aztecs to the Babylonian, Chaldean cultures in Mesopotamia, and you also see it in the Oriental world as well.
Do you think, Chris, perhaps, when you look at your Stone Encyclopedia book, do you think that's why we're accessing these entities in the etheric realm? Is because that's how we're able to access them? We're genetically linked with them?
Yeah, I mean, ayahuasca is a really, that is a very important key in the Middle America and Latin America geographical area. You have an analog of that, which is the use of Syrian rue in the Middle East. DMT, in terms of in Egypt, the DMT was being extracted from bulrushes and from the blue lily of the Nile. Essentially, the common denominator that we see across all of these different cultures and all these different eras of time is DMT.
Wow.
DMT from the lily, DMT from the bulrush, DMT from ayahuasca, DMT from Syrian rue. DMT is the key. DMT is the telepathic secret lever to putting yourself into a self-hypnotic trance, which opens up your landscape of your inner mind to having open communion with these non-physical entities.
I don't know how long we got for the second hour, Chris, but I just want to get slugged through some stuff and some. I know you brought. I'm just going to jump to the Jaguar statue of Germany.
Okay, yeah.
You sent me this. I wasn't even aware of this. I think this thing is incredible, and I'm kind of glad because we're kind of going on a very, very Paleolithic theme today, where this is really deep antiquity stuff, and I think that's great. I think that's great about the research now is that we're past that stupid 3000 BC window where the origins of civilization was 3000 BC and
ridiculous.
Nothing existed before it, and everything else before that is called prehistory and it didn't exist. So I think we're past that now, and we're just talking epochs that were unheard of 20 years ago.
Well, the Jaguar statue, I mean, when I first discovered that back in 2008, it was so shocking to me. I was in Germany. I was visiting the Egyptology collection in Berlin, and I went traveling around different towns in Germany. And this wooden statue, which is the body of a man, but with the head of a jaguar, immediately hit me that this is something that is an experience which many people report on ayahuasca. And it is something that you can see in the great cultures of Mexico. In the Yucatan Peninsula, you have these stone carvings where you've got like a jaguar, big cat with its mouth open, and inside this mouth is the head of a man. And of course, this has, great resonances with shamanism and with the spirit world. What we see in ancient Egypt is that we see shape-shifting going on where a great pharaoh dies. He's obviously got a human body when he dies. But when his spirit, his Ka, transcends into the spirit world, he has a different form. He might have a body of a man still, but he has the head of a ram. That's just one example. These jaguar-headed humanoids are one of the most archetypal, common entities that people report when they see visions on ayahuasca. You have serpents that speak to you. You have the jaguar-headed men, and then you also have the bird-headed men as well, who are pretty heavyweight dudes. Most of the time, anyone that comes across these bird-headed men is they're pretty stern characters. They say, "We rule this planet. You are just here as a visitor, and you watch yourself because we're the bosses." This is the type of message that a lot of people get, and they're very shocked by it.
Sure.
But when you look at ancient Egypt, look at the great Thoth. Thoth is an ibis-headed human man in the pantheon of great entities and gods and beings, whatever you want to call them, in ancient Egypt. So We can see now that there are great concordances. We've got the internet, we've got global communication. We are putting together now, finally, independently of the strictures of academia, the true history of how we are, how we got to where we are now, and what the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Olmecs, the Jomon people, the Dogon, what they were all up to. And this idea that Columbus, or, you know, it's this ridiculous idea that the Americas had not been traveled to before the, you know, the era of the Portuguese and the Spanish conquistadors is ridiculous. It is so ridiculous. Wow. Look at those Olmec heads. They have African features very similar to the Ekinawa people in East Africa. However, some of the Olmec heads, they're more kind of like the Polynesian Maori type people. Now, when you look at the trade winds around the planet, and you look at them with Mexico in the center of the map, you can see that if the Chinese and the Japanese combined ancient culture wanted to go to Central America, they've got two choices. They could go either via Oceania, and they could arrive on the opposite coast from Yucatan, or they could go across North Africa, down maybe into Senegal, down into Mali, leave from the Ivory Coast, go across the Atlantic, and Bob's your lobster, they'd be in the Caribbean. You know, and I think this is really what's been going on. And the thing I would like to say to you, James, and this is something which I've just been researching now, I've been trying to get Russian space satellite images of the Chinese pyramids, because they are acknowledged by the Chinese government now. The Chinese government denied them. They put earth over those pyramids and they planted pine trees on them. Yep. Now there is a statement, it's an official statement, and they say, well, yeah, okay, these are Z Lord tombs. Okay, so there is a statement now where they have acknowledged them. But the problem is this, is that to get really clear imagery of them, you have to go to the satellite websites. The images that I've managed to get from the Russian space satellite websites, I can tell you now, when you compare these Chinese pyramids to the Teotihuacan site, which is neither Mayan, is neither Aztec. This is a separate. This is a whole separate culture, by the way. A lot of people don't realize that. They go to Teotihuacan, they think the Mayans built it.
They walked in, found it, and they said that they found it, and they just adopted it. Exactly,
the same as Stonehenge. Everybody thinks that the Druids built Stonehenge. I mean, do me a favor. You know, Woodhenge and Stonehenge and Avebury. I want to say this to the listeners. We have got some bombshells coming to us because the dating of these megalithic circles is so far out, it's laughable. Personally, for me, you know, the central great big massive stone at Avebury that got smashed to pieces, that could be, you know, we could be talking about from the time of the Ice Age. You know, wow. This is really where I'm going. I think that these sites, it's ridiculous. How can you have a megalithic culture making Stonehenge and Avebury 2,450 BC virtually, you know, I mean, the distance between Wiltshire and Cairo is not a massive distance in the global perspective. And yet this is the same time frame as the building of the Giza necropolis. I mean, it's ridiculous. Obviously, the Sphinx temple, that megalithic structure there around that Sphinx, those giant pink granite uprights, this is much older than the rest of those Giza monuments.
You know, we both made expeditions to Egypt on several occasions, Chris, and I totally agree with that. But just purely on the megalithic European stuff, and I'm glad you brought up that point, because I got serious problems. I mean, let me just throw out the accepted carbon dates for sites that are kind of popular or very well known. So you have Göbekli Tepe, say 10,500 BC, 9,600 BC, whatever it is, Ice Age stuff. Then you have Karahunj in Armenia, about 7,000 BC. Then you have Karo More in Sligo, 5,400 BC. Kirkcaldo in Brittany, 4,800 BC. Then, right beside Karo More, 20 miles away, 1,500 years later, you have an identical site, 3,500 BC. And then you have this popular wave of like 2,500 BC.
Yes.
What's going on for 1,000 years? Why are we getting like... And I think the best example of that is, well, like I said, in Sligo, Karo More, Karo Keel, two megalithic tomb complexes or ceremonial complexes that have astronomical alignments to stars, constellations, same type of crystallized use of passage tombs, same alignments, same shapes, same stylistic features of engineering. 20 miles from each other, but 1,500 years apart. What happened for 1,500 years? You know, and I just think that when you carbon date something, you're only carbon dating the last time it was used.
It's ridiculous.
You're carbon dating the occupants of that monument at the time it was occupied, occupied.
Well, you know the dating of Stonehenge is based on the fragments of organic material that were found in the Aubrey holes or in some hole near the slaughter stone. I want to say to the listeners that the Druids did not build Stonehenge. And the way that the carbon dating has been done is that, say, for example, a Druid comes along 1,000 years after Stonehenge has been built, and he has a fire, and an archaeologist in the 20th century finds a lump of the wood from that fire that the Druid had. The entire site is then dated to the time when that Druid was there. They say, oh, that's when it was built. This is nonsense. It's such idiotic nonsense. It's laughable. It really is laughable. These sites are much older.
It's crazy.
Just look at them.
It's crazy.
Just look at the weathering at Avebury on those giant stones.
Yeah, we're talking long epochs. I
mean, long time.
Stonehenge did have there was the foundation holes or something found in the car park. That somebody's throwing out 10,000 BC dates for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, we've just had the Durrington Walls discovery, where they buried shaped menhirs.
I was there the day they announced it. I was actually I was doing stuff at Stonehenge and Woodhenge, and I was actually at Durrington Walls the day they had announced it. And apparently they've known about that for a long time. And they had
James,
they have a program of release. They release the information like a program, knowing that it's outdated, but they won't release this until a certain date.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They've had satellites up in space mapping the thickness of the ice caps for 20 years using ground-penetrating radar from a spaceborne satellite. They know where all the diamonds are. They know where all the gold is. They know where all the uranium is. This information is worth not billions but trillions of dollars. They know exactly what is in the ground. They've collected so much data. If they don't know that something is there, it's not because they don't have the data about it, it's because they haven't put the investment into the staff to actually analyze the data that they've collected.
Sure. You know, there's a place in Bolivia, in Tiwanaku, and there was a Polish researcher there, Arthur Poznanski, and I think it's one of the great examples of archaeoastronomy, and why I love archaeoastronomy so much, because it indicates something more accurate than carbon dating. The only problem is you got to accept it. Because of the tilt of the Earth, we have the Chandler. Well, we have precession. We also have the Chandler wobble as well, but one's a 41,000, one's 26,000. Besides that, they'll all add up to the sun being off a little bit, but not very much. I mean, we're not talking like stars being off. Like 200 years, the stars are off by precession. But the sun alignments were over the corners of the temple. And Poznański put a date on it at about 1700 BC, or 1700,000 years. However, his accurate measurements was with strings and compass needles. So, if anything, you could just refine the measurement to maybe 15,000 to 12,000, but we're still talking really deep antiquity, and we're talking that Ice Age epoch again. And
That's right.
I think if you're going to categorize stuff, I think around the time of the Ice Age, cataclysm, that's kind of the Great Flood and all of that, I think you're looking at, you know, a wave of building after that to probably find the North Pole again, to find the tilt of the Earth again, to find the precession of the cycle and start building the body of knowledge, starting from scratch again. And I think probably lots of stuff goes back to that time frame.
I agree. Absolutely. I mean, you know, you have to go where the evidence takes you. And we, you know, with these new little robots, we're finding new artifacts all the time. And the other thing I just want to mention is that in a little museum, I've been sent images just recently. I think it's from Cholula. Cholula in Mexico, by the way, has got, apart from the Chinese pyramids, is the biggest pyramid in the free world.
Wow.
3 times the size of the Giza Great Pyramid, much bigger than the Bosnian Pyramid. It's in Cholula. It's massive. And a lot of people don't, when I say, you know, that's bigger than, you know, it's like the biggest pyramid that you can easily go and visit. People don't believe me because they've never been told that, but it's true.
Wow. It's amazing. Yeah. I got one last thing I want to mention. My part of the world, Chris, and we spoke off air about this place before, but it's just mind-bending, and I want to bring it up because we're going to have a great discussion about it. But Boa Island in County Fermanagh in Northern Ireland.
Amazing.
It's just bizarre, isn't it?
It is the most, I mean, I'll tell you now, there are certain places that you visit or certain places that you see photos of. It's like the first time you see Easter Island. It's like the first time that you really see and appreciate the size of the monuments in Egypt. Those figures in that field that are just scattered around that field in Ireland, there is something very primeval. There is something so important there, James, that once we get to the bottom of it, it will shake the world of academia.
Yeah, it's and Boa Island basically is near. It's near Lough Erne. It's on Lough Erne in County Fermanagh in Northern Ireland. These strange shaped faces and stone figurines. I don't think they even really know how old this stuff is.
Well, they don't.
They're pulling figures out of hats, but it's deeply deep within the mythology. Boa itself comes from the Irish bow of the Celtic goddess of war, and she's very linked with she's kind of linked with that Ishtar figurine. She's very like that, described exactly like that. And the Morrigan, she took the form of a crow, and that the crow's feet of the Ishtar goddess of sex and war.
Well, she's also linked with the witch, the horrible child abductor, child eater, that was married to one of the biblical characters in the book of Genesis.
Wow.
Yeah, she's also linked to that as well.
And so they both at the same time. The Celtic goddess of war was Boa, and that's what Boa Island takes its name from. And she had those crows type feet. The goddess of sex and war, and that's what Ishtar is. She's shown in the British Museum in London with crow's feet, goddess of sex and war. And I'm sorry, there's just too many coincidental descriptions there.
Now, there's one thing I want to ask you, James, about these strange alien type creatures that you see carved into churches and carved into megalithic sites in Ireland. Looks like a little grey alien. He's got a vagina and he's holding it open.
Oh, they've got a special name for them, haven't
they? They're called shinalagigs. Yeah.
Shinalagigs.
Yeah. What are they?
I have no idea, but it's like provocative and weird alien stuff rolled into one. I don't know.
That shape. The ovoid shape of,
The thing is, Christianity in Ireland is bizarre. it's got so much bizarre stuff with it. Christianity in Ireland was a very bizarre, exotic thing because they tried so much to adopt the local Irish culture. That's why the Irish mythology has preserved the megalithic monuments, and not all of it. I mean, we're the only megalithic territory in Western Europe of all the megalithic domains from Scandinavia right down to the Mediterranean. We're the only ones to have a written textual mythology associated with it. And they talked about the Sidhe, and the Sidhe was a nickname for the Dinashe. Dinashe means the people of the mounds, and they just abbreviated it to the Sidhe, or the mounds people, basically. And
the mounds mean tumuli, do they?
Yes, tumuli, the people of the tumuli, basically. Yeah.
So when they say people of the tumuli, what they're really talking about, this is a very important thing, is that the tumuli represent the first piece of dry earth to emerge from the primordial ocean.
Yeah.
That's what they are.
Yeah, and they talked about those, and they talk about the entities associated with them.
They're Ogdode then. They're Ogdode. That's why they look the way they do.
Well, they talk about the two groups of people that are associated with these. The two of the Danann and the Fomorians, they were the supernaturals. There was normal peoples as well. The Numidians, the Caesarians, the Milesians, Gaels from Spain.
Did you say Caesarians?
The Caesarians. It's the... No, not Caesarian, like the C-section, no. Caesarians, it's a group of people that descends of Caesar.
Wow.
But all these groups of people that conquered Ireland, the Fir Bolg as well, the men of bags, which then you wondered, was the Fir Bolg like the Sumerian people with the bags of the buckets? Or the Mexican
Well, those little buckets are called situlas, and you see them in ancient Iraq, but you also see them in Mexico as well.
Mexico as well, yeah. And bizarrely, that the people of the men of bags, they got wiped out. They were the ones that had the ramparts on the west of Ireland, these stone forts. But of all these groups of people that were they talked about Ireland being taken 5 times. So we have Irish mythology called the Leabhar Gall and the Heron book, which basically means the book of the taking of Ireland. And they sometimes just abbreviate that descriptive thing to the Book of Invasions, but it basically translates the Book of the Taking of Ireland. And Ireland was taken 5 times by 5 groups of people. And the last ones to take it were the Milesian Gaels, were the sons of Mil España. They came from Spain. The Milesian Spanish soldiers, they came over here, and they were one of the last ones to take Ireland. And we're talking deep antiquity here, not 16th century now. So we're talking deep antiquity, and they subjugated the two of the Danann, the supernatural race, which were probably these figurine people here that we're talking about. You know, and they were and they also interbred with the Fomorian Ogs, these giants, the race of giants. And we
wow.
And when
that's like the Nephilim then. The legend of the Nephilim.
I call them the Nephilim Og, or the Og Fomorians, or you can call them what you want. I mean, the Og, here's the thing, we have Angus Mac Og, and we have the megalithic monuments got the word Og in them, especially around Stonehenge. You have Ogburn. All the
yeah, of course you do, yeah.
All the place names in England and the towns surrounding it, near megaliths, that all have the word Og in them. Angus Mac Og is one of the Angus son of Og. He was the supernatural two of the Danann guy who had a father who was a Fomorian. So you can actually draw genealogy tables from the Irish mythologies because it says who was related to who married who had kids by who. They even talk about stepfathers. The Dagda, he had a stepfather who he didn't like. So we're talking about specifics here that doesn't really seem kind of godlike. It seems like more human-like or genetically... Yeah. You can able to just see, and you can see the transmutation from mythology to some sort of reality element to this. When you get into it deep enough, and even more bizarre, the Ogma, Honeymelt was his nickname. He was the guy. He was a poet, and he was the guy who founded the Irish language. The Irish language came from Ogham script, or Om. It's a silent G, so we say Om script, like the Om as in resistance, Om script. But it's English people pronounce it Ogham, and it basically comes from Ogma, the guy who invented the Irish script, which was almost like a runic writing with dashes and like a Morse code, and that's pretty easy to decipher. We have all the Om script very, very similar, and very especially around that area in Boa Island as well.
Yeah. Now
here's the thing, and this is the clincher, Chris, and we'll kind of maybe wrap up with that, but because we're going on a crazy one here. But the Om script was converted by the Christian monks into a Latin alphabet, and so they they took the oral history of Ireland and they wrote this down at a time when, you know, this stuff was like the Da Vinci science fiction, the Dan Brown Da Vinci science fiction book of the day. It was like the most ultimate science fiction you could create, or fact. You make it up, you can call it what you want, you can call it fanciful, you can call it mythology, you can call it history. These books were considered history up until the 18th century, and then they went, we don't like it, we don't believe it, it's mythology. Setting that aside, when the monks wrote this stuff down, they were trying to convert the pagans of Ireland to Christianity, and they were losing a battle because they were just dogmatic in their pagan beliefs. So they adopted so many pagan customs. They even probably took druids into the church.
Oh yeah.
And there's evidence that a lot of these church people, or saints that we call them, are actually probably druids that hid within the church to survive.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
when they wrote,
did you know that a lot of the voodoo spirits were renamed after Catholic saints, and some of those saints are Irish saints?
No, I didn't. Wow.
Oh yeah. I mean, modern voodoo is a synthesis of Catholic dogma that has been superimposed over shamanistic earth magic from Africa.
I think that's what the pagans were doing. They were taking this shamanism and then they basically lost it because the Celtic peoples that then inhabited the Tuatha De Danann, these Milesian Gaels, whatever, they pretty much wiped them out. I don't think it was an ethnic cleansing like a purely war thing. I think there was interbreeding. There's talk about them interbreeding, and that they were the descendants of them, and they morphed with the Fomorians. And when you read the tales, there's so many examples of Irish mythology books that survive.
Yeah.
That they all are almost exact copies of each other, found in books all across Ireland at different epochs and different times. The mythology never changed. It didn't even morph, because these Janus figurines that we're talking about may actually be just a throwback to the Irish mythology, and they were putting it in stone as well as putting it in writings. But they even have, the monks, when they wrote it down, they were so detailed and so passionate, and they may have been druids as well, that were actually trying to survive within the church. And they went, okay, we're going to be subjugated by the Christianity movement. Let's hide within the church and try and survive. Yeah. And they wrote down very archaic terms. They didn't even have the terminology for what it meant, so they put footnotes in the books because they didn't. And had they have understood, the monks have understood fully the full extent of this pagan religion, if you want to call it that, or pagan history. I mean, it was in direct opposition to the church. That would have been just scrubs on the record. So the fact that these books survive, I mean, there's some of them are pristine, 12th century. They're fragments surviving from 7th century. And one of the best known books is the Book of Invasions that I mentioned. I'll give you the English names. The Laura Gala Nahidre, or the Book of Duncow, it's known as in English, because it's wrote on a cowhide. And that was symbolic in itself, because the cow and the bull are in the stories themselves. It was actually written in bullhide, and that book is almost pristine, and they talk about the bull raids and Queen Maeve, and all the figureheads are all there, and all the stories, they're all the same story, they're all the same interactions, who married who and who interbred with who. Yeah. And they're trying to put time frames in some of this stuff, and they say it might have been around the turn of the millennia, around the time of Christ and stuff.
Are these Shenanigig figures only on churches? Aren't they carved into some ancient rocks on beaches?
Yeah. But I think that the stuff that's in the churches were, like the megalithic monuments, were also they built megalithic structures into churches. So, and they may have took these and put them into the masonry as well.
I think they did.
That's personally what I think they did.
I think that, the reason it looks like a grey alien holding open a vagina is because that is a message very similar to what we're seeing in the Venus goddess figurines. It's about fertility. It's about some unearthly, unhuman being interacting with the direct fertility process in humans.
Yeah, and the Janus figurines, these strange, weird shaped, narrow chin, big eyes, these like grey alien looking creatures from Boa Island that we're talking about. I mean, they also have the long, narrow fingers pointing towards the navel, like Easter Island as well.
Yeah, well, they're kind of cupping the area where the reproductive organs are.
Yeah.
We see that in Easter Island. We see it in Ireland.
Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, Göbekli Tepe as well.
Yeah. Personally, I think, you know, and some of these Janus figurines are built into the walls of a church as well. And I just think that they took what they could. And just put it into the ritual buildings and just said, okay, we're your new religion. You can have can have a bit of the old.
Yeah.
Look what didn't the Persian Empire do that? They let people keep their own customs, but you subjugated and you were bowing down to the king, like so.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can go to Saudi Arabia. A lot of people don't know this, but there are megalithic buildings that are dated. You know, I mean, they would be. I think they are dated to about the same time as Stonehenge, 2,450 BC or thereabouts. Mm-hmm. But these are buildings made with megalithic menhirs in circular formations in Saudi Arabia.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. And that kind of stuff is, you know, you have to go to specialist people like us, because for some reason, as far as the mainstream media is concerned, that is off limits. Yeah. There is a whole area of ancient architecture which is never on the mainstream media. For example, on the island of Minorca in the Mediterranean.
Oh yeah, the T-shaped pillars.
Weird, and they're never on TV.
Yeah, they never mention it, do they? It's like probably one of the most interesting.
Yeah,
they're
the oldest buildings, I think, in Europe, and yet they're not on the TV. Now, why is that? And also, there are stepped pyramid kind of platform structures in Tenerife that were meant to have been built by the Guanche people. Well, you see this word Guanche in Latin America as well. So there was probably a stepped pyramid building culture that had gone across the Atlantic from Tenerife to Latin America. And again, it's not on the TV.
Chris, we're way over the time schedule today. What a I knew it would be like this anyway. But Chris, where can people get your work? I'll try and put
Star Gods. You can get my digital book Star Gods and also Stone Age Psychedelia from ChristopherEverard.com. And if you want to watch my documentaries, you know, that have been filmed literally all over the world, in dozens of countries with drones, and you get to see the inside and the outside of a lot of places which aren't on normal TV. That's the Enigma channel. That's enigmatv.com.
Awesome. Chris, always great talking to you. We've got to team up for a bit of research together this year. Definitely, you're more than welcome over to Ireland at some point. We're going to make that happen.
And genetically engineering and kickstarting modern mankind in Mexico. Where was that in terms of the American cultures? And I found it. And I found it in a little village museum in a place called Tlatelolco in Mexico.
Wow.
And there they have the figurines. Dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens of figurines. And as you probably know, James, not very well labeled. These figurines, some of them are identical to the Dogu figurines that you get from the Jomon people in Japan.
Wow.
Some of them look like the figurines that you get from Iraq. And you see elongated headed men who are alien looking with erect penises inserted into another figurine, which is your typical Venus goddess figurine with no head, stubby arms, no feet.
Wow.
And that is what you're seeing. Now, if you don't go along this route, and normal academia is ignoring this, how do you explain the vast quantity of these figurines, and why were these figurines buried in sacred mounds of earth? It doesn't add up. The only thing that in terms of Japan and China, because that was a kind of combined culture. They were borrowing off of each other. There was a huge amount of ancient trade between Japan and China. And the two cultures really amalgamated. They only really became an isolated culture as far as Japan is concerned at the time of the samurai. So that's about 1,100 years ago. They kind of split away from China, but before then, in the ancient times, they were trading with each other.
Wow.
And what we can see is that the whole of Oceania was actually their trading kind of backyard.
Sure.
You can see Oriental influences all around the planet as long as you've got the eyes open to see them when you go into certain museums. If you go to the Ivory Coast in Africa, and you go to a place, Gabon, Gabon,
Yeah.
you can see ceremonial voodoo masks, which are identical to kabuki masks.
Wow.
And this shows you that there was an Oriental trade route coming from Southeast Asia. It was stretching all the way over into the Middle East and then dipping down into the northern Sahara and going across into the Ivory Coast.
Chris, we need more people like you out there, brother. We need more people like you looking at all of this stuff. It's such a very wide. I mean, but we're in the driving seat. I mean, we have information at our fingertips. All we got to do is research and put it together. It's all sitting there ready for people. It's just
absolutely,
and there's so much of it. It's not like a competition. There's just much of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So. With star gods, when I started writing that book, I was really interested in these Venus figurines. Why did they not have any hands? Why did they not have any feet? And why did some of them not have any heads? What happened is I reread the Epic of Gilgamesh. I reread the Ogdoad creation myths from the Temple of Unas, Saqqara. And I realized that if the legends of the Anunnaki or the star gods was true, and that they'd actually come down from the stars and they'd interacted with monkey men. I don't really like that phrase, but I mean, it sums it up.
Yeah.
And that they actually kick-started Homo sapien and created this spark, this gap, which is in all of the official textbooks, of how is it that we've got these broken cul-de-sac branches of human evolution in South Africa with the monkey men who evolved into nothing. And there is no explanation of why they ended that evolutionary branch. Then all of a sudden there's a gap. Then bang. Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal man are everywhere, Homo erectus and Homo sapien. It's like, it's like jumping from designing an old Citroen 2CV, one of those weird cars that the French farmers drive, to having a Bugatti Veyron.
Wow.
With nothing in between. All right, that is really what the textbooks are telling us. Well, that gap is filled by the Anunnaki, by the Nomos, by the interaction of, the world teachers. Most of the legends say they came from the stars. In Mali and in the Congo, in Africa, they say they came from the sea. Okay, Well, that is very, very similar to the amphibian aspect of the Ogdoad.
Sure.
Now, if you really think about the nuts and bolts process, how would you take those monkey men that were spread all over sub-Saharan Africa? We know that because we've got their skull fragments in the museums. How would you physically manage that if you were a star god coming from the Pleiades or somewhere else? You would have to have an intermediary genetic sausage factory where you would have a process of trial and error. You would genetically modify the human egg. You would genetically splice the sperm, and you would actually have, like I say, a genetic sausage factory situation. That is what these Venus figurines are. They are showing that there were humanoid sausage factory brood mares. Many of these figurines have vertical lines down their stomachs because they weren't giving birth normally. There was a cesarean intersection done to extract the fetus by these star gods, and it all fits together. If you want to look at it carefully, it's the most logical solution. And these legends, we find them in Mali, the legends are in the Congo, the legends are in Japan, the legends are in Iraq, the legends are in Egypt. And the missing part of the jigsaw puzzle, which I had missing up until a few days ago, was where was the this idea of the great world teachers coming from nowhere, maybe coming from the stars,